like jokes, for example. But sometimes they can be collateral damage. So you can see how the drone could be seen in terms of a performativity theory in a sense, in the sense that it's directional in some ways, but its consequences can sometimes be unintended, largely for ill, in the sense that collateral damage is usually civilian life. But Sedgwick's understanding of performativity underscores this sense of how a speech act can veer away from its apparent aims. And this is one understanding of this deviation or perversion, is a way in which the word queer tended to get understood less as an identity or in identitarian terms, and rather as a sort of movement, a veering movement or a deviation. So a movement which would is largely read at the level of bodies or language or thought. Now what I want to do is to cause a further deviation or a further veering, which would be to see performativity as being at the level of objects. So the way that things or materials act in ways which are in concert with bodies, but they act in ways which are contrary to accepted forms of authority, and how that might open up a space that we don't always openly recognize. So this is what I mean by the forensic, as looking into that which is beyond our threshold of visibility or recognizability. So I've been developing what I call veer theory, which would be a theory which would think about how we can swerve away from authoritative forms queer means or does. So the body for Butler, it isn't really an entity as such, rather it's a relationality, it's a relation to other bodies. And when I say bodies, I'm trying to use it in this capacious sense, which would mean human bodies, but also all other bodies. So that would mean that the body would become indissociable from the infrastructure or environment which supports it or allows for its conditions of sustenance or livability. And this is what Butler said to me when I asked her about those two moments in Frames of War, about sort of queerly agentic acts which can be either replenishing or damaging or decimating. And she said that she was certainly interested in my work and what I'm trying to do, but she felt that she was trying, but not by getting there, but that she thinks it's important to think about the ways that infrastructures also act. And I think this is a sort of characteristic of Judith's humility, because I think that this is already going on in her work, in the way that she talks about when bodies assemble on pavements, say in the Arab Spring, or Occupy movements, that there's an acting together of pavement and person, and that all of those different agents are present and agentic or actant in the very action. And I've got an essay on Beth Freeman's book Time Binds. Do you know that book?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I talk about the ways in which Judith Butler's speech in Zuccotti Park at Occupy Wall Street is all about the assemblage of the human and the microphone. So you have this idea of the human microphone, which you may remember from Occupy. So that this is how I think that it's already going on in her work. Now, another big concept for Butler recently is dispossession. She had a book come out a couple of years ago, which is co-written with Athena Athanasiou, who's a Greek feminist, post-structuralist thinker, and it's called Dispossession, and it's about the performative and the political. But another name for dispossession in their terms would be necropolitics, or necroethics is a term which Gregoire Chamaillou, who wrote the book Drone Theory, which I'll talk about a bit, uses. I'm also using the word necrographic, and I'm using that in two ways. There's a double valence to what I mean by necrographic. I mean it both in the sense of necrographic, as in death writing, or the ways in which the political is a death sentence for certain subjects. So a necrographical order would consign certain people to death. But I think there's also a positive way of spinning that, which would be to see the necrographic as the recording of traces or testimonies or memories. And I've been reading this wonderful book by Maurizio Ferraris, he's an Italian new realist. And he wrote this book called Where Are You? And it's on the ontology of the cell phone. And he makes this claim, which is that cell phones aren't for communication, they're for writing. And that seems to me quite interesting in terms of how we think about testimony and witnessing and bringing about justice. And of course, when I say necrographies, I'm playing on a book that Jacques Derrida wrote with Bernard Stiegler called Ecographies of Television. And there's a reading at the end of that book by Derrida of the Rodney King trial and the video, and ways in which we can interpret the status of the evidentiary, as of the readability of the video, which can support, of course, different kinds of readings, but also the ways in which evidence is manipulable in certain ways, which, of course, that can be any kind of evidence, photographic, televisual, or written evidence. But I'm also very interested in this little known essay by Derrida called Faxitexture, which appeared in a book called Anywhere. It was an invitation that Derrida got to write about architecture for this conference in Japan. And the last section is devoted to rethinking LA in the wake of the Rodney King trial. So there's very interesting overlap between what Derrida is talking about in terms of the video evidence in the trial, architecture, infrastructure, and space.
Go. And as he moves, the squares get bigger and smaller. Do you use the term necrography too? Or do you use, because he said necroethics, necropolitics?
No, I don't. So I'm building off of necropolitics to make macropolitics to think about.
Oh, macro. Oh,
Yeah.
I misheard you. Okay.
Yeah, to think about mechanics in video games, and also a bit about the sort of like machine-human interface. And I think there's actually a lot of stuff in like STS that would speak a lot to the project that he's doing.
Yeah.
A lot of people have these networks and power and that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it's really cool stuff.
Yeah. It's neat. It's like I'm trying to, and naturally when you hear someone talk, you kind of start to map their mind. I'm just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Constellations of technically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your work on?
I work mostly on modernist literature and time. And it's the time and temporality stuff that's not being to the cycle and analytical. But and he's talking about time binds, both is on my committee, and
Right,
it's such a cool
yeah.
book. But I can't remember what he said. Oh, the human microphone. I was tying it to Butler. I didn't quite. He said it. I didn't quite follow exactly what was happening there. Just that. Okay.
Yeah, I wonder where the bottleneck is in the internet right now.
Yeah. If we thought it was an iron, I could get Ellie to come back and look, but I guess I'll just email him maybe while we're talking.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I thought someone said that this was wired in, but I don't know if that would actually matter. Compose to.
I mean, you'd think it'd be good stable internet on our side, but
Yeah, it's a, yeah. No, I can't send this email because I'm not on the wireless here. So I'll connect to my phone. I actually have to run to the bathroom. I'm back in like 30 seconds.
Okay.
Sorry.
no worries.
you using a particular theorist? Are you leaning on one? Have you, or a bunch? I imagine.
And still in development, so I'm leaning. I mean, obviously, I'm with FA and thinking about necropolitics, like sort of like original sort of thing. I also think a lot about people like Wendy Chun and Lisa Nakamura and folks who are interested in like material technologies.
Okay. So very So STS people. That's how not.
Yeah. And then like video game studies, stuff about failure.
Yeah. Oh, I should. Cool.
I'm also interested in the forensic, which is something I'm just dipping my toes into right now.
Oh, neat.
Because there's a lot of sort of this trend in video games where a lot of the more brutal games like Mortal Kombat or different sniper games, they do like forensic simulations of the damage you've done to the body. And so like it'll give you a rerun of like a headshot and will show like the bullet going through and like show exactly the stuff that you've done.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael.
Hello?
Hello. Yeah, I'm not sure what happens with the internet. I emailed. I
switched my phone.
Oh, okay, cool. Excellent.
So you won't be able to see me, but you might be able to hear me better.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, our
Our
technician's
internet
here.
is amazing, so it's usually on their end if they're.
Okay, because we're not on wireless, we're wired in, right?
Yeah, you're right into the wall, and we have the fastest connection you can get on campus. So.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks. Just wanted to
Alright.
check. Appreciate it. Okay. All right.
I'm pretty sure the problem's at my end.
Oh, okay.
But if you can live with hearing me and not seeing me, that's okay.
Okay, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, so what was the last thing you heard me say?
Let's see. We were on. I started taking notes on what Amanda was telling me actually. So, necrographic recording traces. Where are you? Ontology of the cell phone. The Italian guy. Is that where your notes are?
No,
yeah.
Derrida.
Oh,
Rethinking LA's architecture in terms of the Rodney King
yeah,
trial.
that's right. Real fast.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll pick up from there on what the way that necropolitics refers to the ways in which certain lives are considered to be lives, lives worth living, worth grieving, worth mourning, while others are unlivable, ungrievable, or unmournable. And of course, the examples of that which Butler focuses on are 9/11, Guantanamo Bay, for example. Another recent example would be Charlie Hebdo. You know, the whole Je suis Charlie. So what lives count in certain situations. So what counts as life and what doesn't count as life depends upon this sort of calculus of social meaning or social viability, in which some lives are relegated to a condition of non-being or of social death, or are simply at risk of death, or are sentenced to death by deprivation of certain structures, which could be homelessness, neglect, just decimation or deprivation of financial supports, which would place them at higher risks of mortality. So that's the obliteration of material, economic, environmental means of sustenance. And of course, certain groups or certain populations are differentially exposed to injury, violence, poverty, indebtedness. So death and precarity as a term, or precarity as a term for this proximity to social death, needs to be more carefully thought in terms of the ways in which it is graduated in certain ways, and that the condition of having a place or having a social meaning, or being conferred with meaning, is differently calculated for different subjects. But in general, precarity means the assignation of a proper place, but really those subjects who are under the regime of necropolitics are consigned to the realm of non-being. a socially designated vulnerability, which is fundamental to neoliberalism, or the operation of neoliberalism, and other modalities of valuelessness, abandonment, impoverishment, racism, whether that's at the level of the state or the individual, fascism, homophobia, sexual assault, militarism, malnutrition, and the governmentalization of forms of aversion, negligence, and decimation of empathy. So there's a link between the neoliberal and dispossession, but there's also a link between sovereignty and this sort of exposure to death. And again, when I talk about exposed subjects, I'm playing on the negative meaning, being exposed to the possibility of death, or being deprived of conditions of living, but also exposed in the photographic sense, in that there is always a trace. So this exposure to death means that powerful subjects, or sovereign states, for example, can subject certain populations to conditions which would ascribe to them the situation of living death, or the situation of to be killed under a necropolitical right, which is to kill or injure or torture. And this is why I suggested the topic of the necrographic to Laurel when she first got in touch with me, because what had just happened in LA was where the video of the policeman shooting the homeless man. So this was seemed to me to be about that necropolitical right to waste a life whose life was already deemed to be wasted, or a life which was already disposable, whereas the policeman's life is not considered to be disposable or wasted. And that can be in the most quotidian ways, or also the most spectacular ways. And this is my interest in drones, because there's a sort of spectacularized, almost cinematic quality to our interest in drones. We like the media fascination with them, even though there's nothing new about them. We've had aerial combat in all of our previous wars, most notably the surgical strikes of the Gulf War. And there's an interesting, it's an interesting term, surgical strikes, which plays on this idea of injurability, in the sense that a surgical strike, which is surgical, we would associate with, healing rather than wounding, whereas a surgical strike is to waste a population, or a target which is considered unworthy of living. So there's something insinuating or insistent about this whole logic, but on the one hand, necropolitics is a sort of macro logic. It's at the level of states, neoliberal governments, and so on. Whereas the drone is something which, in scale, is tiny, or in size, and this is what makes it so. Its mobilization so insistent and insinuating. It can get in a window, for example, but its effects are on a much larger scale, because it can render not just subjects but entire communities or entire populations obliterable or unintelligible. So it eviscerates or tears them away from their conditions of possibility for life. And what that does is to disestablish the very category of the human itself. So you have this non-human object which has been manned by a human thousands of miles away, which is tearing the capacity or condition of living from another subject or another population.